going to make sure that everybody that's here has a raffle ticket. If you do not, I think you go to this nice lady here, because at the end of my brief talking points, we're going to do the drawing. All right, so end of summer, first Monday on the second Monday at Ron Tom's. Everybody just keep coming here and loving this place. They have been so great to us to let us have, I think, 4 or 5 different first Mondays in this space, which is just fantastic. So keep an eye out for where the next one is and what the topic will be. I have a bunch of stuff to share that is important for you guys to know about. The first one is that we just got our own 501c3 as Music Oregon. And what that means is Music Portland will stay alive and doing. Music Portland focuses on economic matters to make sure that music professionals are viable and successful and are making more money and valued for what they do in this very large and respected ecosystem. So that's what we focus on there. It's policy. We've got at least 1 policy council member, 2. We got 3. Oh my gosh. See, there you go. We got Bruce Fife, Evan Hoffer, and Derek Trost, all on the Music Policy Council that has been kicking butt. We also were recognized by the Oregon State Legislature, recognizing commercial music and live performance as an emerging economic sector. This is the foundation for everything. You are not an economy they will respect if you're not recognized. So that all the kinds of benefits the timber industry gets and the shoe companies and all these other stuff is based on this designation. So getting it is huge. They also funded $150,000 for a statewide study of the commercial music sector because nobody knows who it is and there's no way to find it in regular reporting tools. And I explained that you couldn't just put an economist on the job and have them be able to make sense of what it is for Portland. So we got the funding to do a statewide music census to find all the musicians, all the music businesses, all the producers and record labels that are spread across the state and identify different clusters that we'll work with to create sort of chapters to make sure that we're serving them as well as Greater Portland. But that's a big deal. That census, you are going to be hearing about it more. I need everybody here to become an evangelist. Send the note about it to every person in music that you know, because if we don't say we're here, they're not going to support us. So this is the most important thing that you can do. It'll take 5 minutes, and it is absolutely vital that we answer. If you know, we're like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, and we get a 20% response, that's how big our industry is. We have to blow this out of the water. So everybody watch for that and become my evangelists. Also, the election is coming up in November. We have an event on October 17th that is going to be featuring the Music Policy Council, talking about all the work that they're doing, talking about this state census, doing a bunch of things like that. And that is going to be recorded as well. Oh no, not from you. No, actually, this is Stephen Tack who records all of these things, and it's amazing. So yeah, it's going to be at Artichoke Cafe, which is a small thing, but we're going to record it. So we have little bite-sized things. If you want to know about this issue, there'll be some bite-sized information you can consume. We also are doing a candidate survey of everybody at state and municipal elections that is campaigning, and we are asking them specific questions about their support and perspectives on our popular music culture. That, in addition to the incumbents' voting records and support for past music issues, will go into a voter's guide. So it's going to be everybody, good, bad, and ugly, but it will give all of you a way to vote for the people that are supporting what you do. And that's never been available before. So keep an eye out for that. And if you can, come to October 17th at the Artichoke Cafe. We have Portland Music Month is well underway, getting scheduled out for January. If anybody is interested in being a part of that, helping contact venues or helping with promotions or fundraising or anything that your special skills. The lovely Missy is here with a sign-up sheet. We are old school, so please sign up over there. Let me see. Oh, and the Oregon Census too. I have 1 or 2 paid positions. It is short term, but it is, it's really important. And it'll be like 15 hours a week at $20 an hour, and it will run for about 5 weeks. So please, if you are interested in that, make sure you talk to Missy and she'll get it all down. I love Missy. And let me see what else. Everybody has their tickets for the drawing?
Yeah. Okay.
Who feels lucky? Woo! Okay, we haven't announced it, but this is a $25 gift certificate from Music Millennium, and Music Portland is going to double that for you. And support Music Millennium. They are absolute heroes in our community, and they need your help. Record stores are having a hard time, so make sure you go and buy from our friends. Let's see, I think that's it. I think I covered all the buttons.
Thank you, Mira.
Sure. Nope, no problem. Okay, this is it. Spinning it. Okay. See, I'll put mine on. Such old crows up here. Ticket number ending in 6962. Who is it? 6962. No, nobody has it?
Okay, let's try again. This happened last time.
Okay. Sure.
All right.
All right. Last numbers, 6976. Woo! No insider trading.
My services are free here, so.
That's true. He
sorry.
gives it away, people.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to let Missy begin the panel. At the end of the panel, there's going to be time for Q&A. And if there's this many of us, you might want to come up here and pose your question to the panel. All right? And I'll give you the bumps rush if you go over long. Okay? Thank you guys for coming. This just... It means a huge amount to me personally, and I know to Missy. We work hard in solitude, and just seeing all these awesome faces makes it all worth it. Take care.
Yeah, give it up for Mara in a big way.
One thing, some of you may have discovered this event through social media or some other source, or were told about it by somebody. If you are not getting the Music Portland email now, go over to Catherine, who is fresh off a plane from Malawi and is going to be volunteering with us for the 3 months that she's here. Amazing. And she's got a little thing you can just sign in on a mailing list to make sure that you get all the information about the census and everything else. So I know at least one person that has to go do that if they haven't already. But make sure everybody is in this, okay? If you're not sure, do it anyway.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Catherine, for your help. So thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. It means a lot to us. We have a great panel, and I'm going to introduce each of them. In fact, if you guys could come on up, we've got Matt Greco, Frankie Piacinetti, and Tucker Marti.
Yay!
And what I want to do is just read a short bio on each of you. I know probably everyone knows everyone in here, but let's just do this so that if people don't know you, they can hear about it. So let's start with Matt Greco. Hi, Matt.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing great, thank you. Thanks for doing this tonight. So
Of course.
Matt's the owner-operator of The Rye Room, a recording studio in this town, known for cinematic live video series, The Rye Room Sessions. How many people have heard of The Rye Room Sessions? We all have. Greco has a passion for creating high-quality records from pop to jazz, His philosophy for making records, I love this, is akin to making whiskey, bringing together the best ingredients through a thoughtful process to create a high-quality product that is commercially viable and easily enjoyed. Very nice. Such a nice one.
I did not write that.
Of course. Yeah, he's on brand.
Next, let me introduce right here next to me, Frankie Piacinetti.
Passantini.
Centini, sorry. I knew I had it right, and then I started effing around with it this afternoon.
Passantini or Piacentini.
Piacentini. Sorry about that, Frankie. All right, so Frankie is the owner, technical director, and lead engineer at Page Street Sound Lab, not Sound Lab, a newer studio in Portland that celebrates its first birthday in October.
Yeah.
And it is an awesome studio. How many people have been to his space? It's really amazing, isn't it? We had a little meetup there a few months ago. Frankie is a young Portland native whose current focus and work is in vocal production, coaching, and mixing. I know he also has a passion for all ages, access to performance and recording opportunities. So we're glad that you're here and to be thinking about your questions as we go along. And last but not least, you've heard of him. His name is Tucker Martine. He is a Grammy-nominated record producer, recording engineer, and mixer. Paste Magazine included Martine in their list of the 10 best producers of the decade.
Woo!
Martine, I know. Martine works mostly out of his studio, Flora Recording and Playback here in Portland. Artists he's worked with include My Morning Jacket, Sufjan Stevens, yeah, The Decemberists, First Aid Kit, REM, Modest Mouth, Bill Frisell, Nico Case, Katie Lang, Mudhoney Spoon, and I could go on and on and on. The list is a lot longer. But we're really glad to have you here, Tucker. Thank you for agreeing to come tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And what we thought we would do, the format tonight is we have 4 simple questions, and I wanted to just throw them out. I'm here to kind of just ask the questions and keep it on track, and then we'll open it up for audience interaction. So if you've got a question and you think that you can project to the front of the room or move closer to the front of the room, please do so. You may also use the microphone, and we've got my attractive husband in the green back there and Mara here who can help you if you need a microphone. So first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about how you are recouping from the pandemic. And I'd love to know a little more about how artists changed during that time, how your business changed, and then what you did to cope. And we'd love to hear about maybe any creative ways that you used your space during that time when things sort of shifted. So give us an update on how you guys have recovered from that. And we'll just, Matt, can we just start and come this direction?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, COVID's been fun. I would say for me, it's, I do a lot of like more production work at the studio, not just typical bands coming in and recording. So I was actually able to stay decently busy kind of throughout COVID. But it definitely, there definitely were plenty of times where it was nice and quiet. And as far as like stuff that I was doing to kind of, we definitely did a lot of like, at the end of 2020, we upped our COVID protocols. We had like a doctor guy come in and help us get our COVID protocols really up, putting air purifiers and just like everything. So that definitely helped bring clients in, feel safe coming into the studio and being able to record with, even if it's just simple sessions with just like me and an artist, or if there were other people involved. I think it gave a lot of artists the comfort and just knowing that we were kind of doing as much as we could to, make the studio safe. What was some of the other stuff there?
Did you, let's all 3 of you answer, and then I have some follow-up questions about that. Particularly, did you see the same types of slowdowns that perhaps manufacturing, so record pressing, they're backed up.
Yeah.
big time. So are you now backed up? I mean, that's one of the big questions is what's the access like now that everybody's back in motion?
Yeah, I think in some, like I've, Adam Gonsalves, who owns Telegraph Mastering in town, is kind of my go-to mastering engineer, and we've had a lot of conversations about how he's, he'll be like, oh yeah, if things have been slow for you and then now projects picked up, I can expect in like a couple months for some stuff to come down the line to me. So there definitely is, just like I think in manufacturing, the backup with stuff. I think that still is playing a part in our industry too, for sure. But I wouldn't say necessarily, we're like on the, front side of the line there. So it's more the people down the line of, to manufacturing that are then going to feel the effects. But definitely with like, the venues, a lot of venues closing, and just, the overall scene of Portland. I mean, definitely for me, anytime the governor would kind of shut things down, it definitely had a huge effect on business. I was actually surprised at how much that affected the business. I didn't really think it would, but it seemed like every single time she would, make the call for that, people would, that had called and said, hey, I want to come in and do something, they would then, a week later call me and say, hey, I think I'm going to hold off for now. So
That singing thing. Yeah. Tucker?
Well, before the pandemic, I think probably about 80% of my work was records start to finish, just tracking, pre-production to mixing, and then at this point, I would say about 80% of my work today is mixing records that I did not track. Many of which were put together during the pandemic when people just were like, all right, it's not going to just be a month or 2 months or 6 months anymore. So instead of waiting to make the record the way they planned to, they just cobbled it together. And many of them were calling me, asking me what recording interface they should get and how to use it. But also then I've seen that now that touring's opening up again, the bands are behind and they need the touring money in order to be able to make records. And the tours came out of the gate kind of with a clunk. A lot of them getting canceled, and then attendances are down. So a lot of the folks that I work with are from out of town. So I'm noticing that still a lot of them aren't quite really back in the game yet. They're still getting their tours going, and a lot of their tour income is down. So I don't know how much of this changes is going to be permanent. I am seeing, I would say in the last 4 or 5 months, I'm starting to see more kind of tracking inquiries coming in. But it also might just kind of be the way a lot of people took that opportunity to learn. Somebody in the band was always interested in recording, and now they know just enough where they're going to do half their record. Maybe they'll go to a studio for drums, and then they'll come home for everything else, and then hire out mixing. And
Right.
at the moment, it feels like that's the way things are going.
And I'll have a follow-up question to that. But Frankie, tell us how it's impacted you with a new studio, and you had just gotten up and rolling, right?
Kinda, yeah. It's actually it came at a funny time. Page Street was actually about 90% of the way done with the contracted build out. Very little was left to be done, but contractors got stay-at-home ordered, which they were actually more frustrated about than I was, honestly. And so everything in terms of Page Street opening was set back, I'd say roughly about a year. They came back, contractors came back in fall or winter of 2020, I want to say. And then 2021 is when I did wiring and set up everything. And so during the pandemic, I was doing, at the time I was actually teaching music mostly and doing some remote mixing, and throughout 2020 I'd have people over for some light production at my home when people were comfortable. But it came at this time for me when I was actually still, for Page Street, refining some subtler details of the business plan, and COVID as a phenomena culturally and societally drastically altered some aspects of how I wanted to run a recording studio. Coming out of that, being prepared to open, so we opened about a year ago, so things were starting to open up again. Attempts were made to open back up again, let's put it that way, around that time. It's all kind of a blur at this point, but and I started to look at what my studio would be, wanted it to be a little differently. I don't think if there had been COVID, I don't think I would have built a lounge. It's one of those things. Because I was engineering and designing it, but I was like, why do we need a lounge? Sounds great. Like no one needs to hang out here, But it became. I started to think more about the studio as an experience, and especially coming out. I have a lot of clients now who say, I spent a year and a half, spent 18 months recording myself in my bedroom. I want anything but that right now. If I'm going to be spending my money, I want the experience of being taken care of coming into an inviting space, and obviously having someone else take care of these things that I was banging my head against the wall, researching interfaces and stuff for so long, and so it also reoriented how I wanted to run a new studio coming out of that in terms of building community. I mean, I was a part of a scene that is like dead and buried because of COVID, like 100%. It's just completely gone.
You mean the DIY scene?
Yeah, DIY, this sort of pocket and age group of DIY music and house shows and things like that. That was the one final blow, and again, from my sort of circle in that and age group, it's pretty much gone. And so, yeah, it really shifted things for me. A lot of thinking about what I wanted my studio to look like coming out of this. And, I have come over some humps with variants. So every time a new variant was about, there was always a slump there. Thankfully, I had some remote mixing I could be doing during those times, but yeah.
So, did you all? So one of the things for the audience to know is that Music Portland really spent a lot of time way prior to me coming aboard. But when COVID came upon us, Music Portland really worked to increase access and amounts of COVID relief for musicians and for music businesses. Correct? I don't know the exact amount that you increased it.
$700,000.
$700,000. That was done by a small team.
Yeah, those were folks that had been previously repeatedly denied by OED. So we did individual case management and just fought.
Yeah, and what she said was that they individually, fought for people and businesses to be able to access more money. Did you all feel that you were well supported as business people during the pandemic? Did you feel that your industry got what it needed? No. Well, I want to.
No, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot to say too about the fact that we're still at the tail end of this hopefully last variant, and I think a month or two from now things could feel really different.
It's gonna be over in a month or two.
My band recorded an album or did all the tracking for an album during COVID, and then what we do is take it all, and then John, my husband, learned how to do a bunch of stuff like you said, but then at the end you have to go find somebody, and we always choose Larry Crane. Just we've been with him for a while, but Larry fixes things that need to be fixed. But not that it needed to be fixed. Maybe. He's really good. I mean, but one of the things that leads us to our next question is talking about the definition of studio production. because it means a lot of different things to different people. And sometimes there are these antithetical sort of reverse ways of looking at things. It might actually be more cost efficient to get in front of a producer earlier rather than later. So I wanted to throw it out there and ask, maybe we go back down to Matt and just move across the panel and talk a little bit about what does studio production mean for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Studio production to me, I think it's definitely multifaceted. I mean, I work on projects that are very like, you know, production heavy, where I might just have a solo artist coming in and we're doing more of like a pop thing. So there's, you know, maybe not a ton of like players and instruments involved. It might just be me producing and a lot more sample-based stuff and, you know, that kind of thing. And then I, you know, might have a full group come in and it's all live instrumentation, everything's tracked live, and, you know, so I think there's definitely a lot of differences there. And nowadays I see, especially with a lot more stuff with home recording and just access to, you know, equipment and stuff, things being so much cheaper and the quality being there than it was even just, you know, like 5-10 years ago. I mean, stuff is amazing now for, you know, you don't have to spend that much money. I definitely see a lot of projects that are done, maybe they started at home and then they realize, oh, this isn't like, you know, gonna work out so great, so I need to like go record at a studio, and then they record at a, you know, bigger studio in town. And then they're like, oh, maybe actually I can do some of this stuff at home. So then they come back home, track some more stuff, and then that's not really, like, my vocals don't sound good. So now I need to go to a pro studio to cut my vocals. So then they go to a different studio. And some of these projects I get to you know, maybe it's a later tracking stage or editing or mixing or something. And ultimately, I mean, you know, to what you were saying with like, you know, sometimes it might be actually more affordable to just hire a producer and a studio just from the beginning. It could definitely cost a lot of money to be going that route. So sometimes the DIY thing, you know, if you know what you're doing and you can do a lot of stuff at home, then yeah, it could definitely potentially be cheaper. But a lot of times that's not usually what I see. A lot of times I see these projects that come to me that have been kind of DIY / pro studios, and it's just kind of, it's a bit of a mix. And I think a lot of us definitely have experience with that. More and more nowadays too. I am definitely seeing that stuff. But the bulk of, you know, people who come in to my studio are looking to like, you know, do the whole project there and are, you know, looking to have it be done by a professional, typically hire me to produce. And those ones are it's higher production. Yes, there's more money involved, but the end product is definitely gonna sound great. So,
Tucker?
The question is, what is production? Is that the question? Which probably everyone in here knows too. We could be here all night trying to figure that out. But for me, the bottom line is that I'm in charge of translating the artist's ideas to the recorded medium in a hopefully a really quality way, in a creative way, and I have a good understanding of the tools that do that. And it's my job to, you know, really listen to what they're trying to do and use my experience to help translate that through this language that they might not understand as well, and hopefully empower them in the process and show them all the options, and they can, you know, point it, which, ooh, that's a cool color I've never seen before. I would really like to use that. Sometimes it's really hands-on, you know, helping at every step of the way, like tinkering with the songwriting and the song choices and the player choices and the instrument choices and the arrangements, and a lot of coaching through performances. And other times people come in and they have their shit so dialed that I'm just trying to stay one step ahead of them so they don't even notice that they're in a studio and they can just play, you know, and it's everything in between.
Nice. And yeah, there seems like the intimate relationship that you can build with an artist where you really get to know them and you know what their capacity can be. It can be a really powerful thing to give them, yeah.
Yeah, I always start by just like finding a lot of things that I like about the people that I'm about to work with and wanting to make sure we emphasize those strengths, bring those to the surface.
Frankie?
Yeah. Both summed up most of what I could have even thought of, but I guess I'll just speak to my current experience now, because it's pretty, it's all over the place for me right now, where I'm brought in at what point in a project to help produce. 80 to 90% of my clientele right now is hip hop, actually, and so in some cases I bring work as a vocal coach, an instructor, and I can sort of do the full service in that realm where I'm engineering. I can provide coaching on the spot, and production type things, helping people. Doing a good job of listening to the artist and who they are, and trying to help get the closest to their voice as possible and help them with that. In other cases, I'm brought in specifically in that genre in the sound design department, where someone says, I made this record at home during the pandemic. I can't stand it. It's not what I wanted it to be at all. And so I'm brought in to rework everything. And in that case, I'm working more from the position of someone where I have there's a lot of the composition there, there's a lot of the energy and emotion there. It's already there in demos, and I don't get too much into rewriting it, but I'm brought on at that point is to create the texture at that point. So working a lot in sound design. I have a couple projects where it is like start to finish. Someone's brought me written songs, written demos, and I'm doing all that, but it is, I guess, how a lot of my clientele is recording. I'm coming in at it always at a very different phase. Most of my clients, I'm not looking at the whole breadth of production. It's puzzle pieces here and there. It's just my right now mostly.
So this is a great question that Mara, back when we first started working together last spring, we were talking about this particular panel. And Mara said, what we really need is a succinct horror story from every panelist. That tells it, it just says in a succinct way, tell us a horrific story so that we can learn what not to do when we bring our music to a studio. And there are also studio professionals here, and what are some things, pitfalls, some things good pieces of advice that you might offer to other people within this industry and the artists who come to you? Matt.
No names.
Okay, no.
Turn off the camera. No, I'm just kidding.
I would say that there's a general, for me, always a not so ideal situation is you talked a lot about trying to kind of just, connect with the artists and make sure that you're just providing a sound that they're going for and stuff. And I think always a tough thing for me is, if an artist comes in, and I think that there's an aspect of, if they're hiring me to produce, I don't necessarily know exactly what they're going for, but always a tough one is when an artist comes to me, and I'm very big on references, and an artist, we're talking about a tune, and I'm like, okay, yeah, we could go a lot of different directions with this, because of course it's like a vocal and acoustic guitar, and then I say, throw out some artists or songs for me, and they do, and they all sound completely different. They're like all different genres, and I'm like, okay, well, can we narrow this down a little bit? And I think, you know, in general, I always try to kind of coach, especially like newer artists, like, you know, let's just work on trying to figure out what you're going for, and you know, if you do have a sound in your head, you know, let's talk about that. I'm super big on pre-production. And the times that I've done records with artists where, or even just like a single, where they are really just like not sure of what they want, and then I kind of try to help push them in a certain direction, and then they're, you know, not necessarily vocal about whether they like that direction or not. Ends up just not usually working out super great. So I've had a few, you know, times like that where it's been difficult. And at the end of the day, I think all we want to do is just, you know, help artists make a great record. And yeah. So.
There ought to be a code word, like some code word that's like, oh, we need to be able to say this word and not get upset with each other, but listen, we're not on the same page.
Yeah.
Tucker, do you have any good horror stories?
Well, I would say my biggest horror stories are all clumped in the earlier period of my life doing this. Like the biggest ones, not, I mean, there are all challenges every time out, but I think a lot improved when I learned what questions to ask, because they might be a great songwriter, they might be a great band. That doesn't mean they have any skills in how to communicate to you what they're after. You can draw your own conclusions from what you hear, but it's not always completely laid out. So I think that for me, a lot of it is asking questions until I'm really clear, and if I need them to give me examples, and if they say they like, you know, I like it a really warm sound, I'm like, well, what does that mean? And they might play me something that's like really trebly electro music, and I would have thought that's bright and cold, and that I'm like, no, but like, listen how warm the bass is, or whatever, and like it's not just on them to explain it to me, it's also on me to make sure that I'm clear and that we have established a common language. So yeah, I won't tell horror stories just for the sake of horror stories, but I've found that I can avoid most horror situations that way. You can't avoid challenges completely because it's a creative process, and artists and what have you, but yeah.
Frankie, you have any?
Well, I think this early on in running a studio, I can confidently say that the horrors are yet ahead of me.
That's the spirit.
Yeah, that is.
Experience. I can confidently say that. But to loop it in to the sort of subtext of your previous question, I mean, so many situations, there's so much gear grinding when you just want to say, did you have a pre-producer? Like, did you do X amount of homework, and getting someone on pre-production, preparing them for the studio, letting them know this is how long this is going to take, this is what the process looks like, so that when they're in, because when they're in and they haven't done that, it often gets taken out on you, or you're expected to. I mean, this is speaking simply as when I'm hired as an engineer, purely as an engineer, and of course being assumed a producer without any prior discussion, which I'm sure there's also a book of horror stories on that as well. But again, nothing terrible, really. I mean, like I said, any gear grinding is usually stuff that could have been solved if they had brought on someone, especially with a bigger project, brought on someone early on that had pre-production advice.
I think
one of the you bring up a really interesting issue, because one of the things with the Echo Fund that we're getting ready to award grants, but one of the things that came up with our review team was an underestimation of the cost of recording and engineering. That came up a bunch in the feedback from the first round or two of that. So yeah, I would think that you have something on that?
Well, yeah, and to what Frankie was talking about, I think managing expectations is huge. So with the person on the phone who's like, yeah, man, we're just gonna come in and bang it out. You know, we got 8 tunes and like, yeah, man, it's just like live, you know, like a day or two, you know, and been there enough times, you know, and that can occur. And in the history of recorded music, it has occurred, and sometimes it's even good. And I'm all for it, like I'm all for the lofty goal, but if somebody comes in and anything short of that is a failure, like you're doomed. You're setting yourself up for failure. So, you know, it's my job to be the voice of reason, like, okay, that would be nice, but let's keep these things in mind, and that, you know, that's gonna mean a lot of stuff. That's gonna mean probably not time to fix this and that, and that's gonna mean probably having to keep one of the first few takes, and that's gonna mean if you're playing acoustic guitar right next to the drums, you can't have the acoustic guitar very loud in the mix, and like all these things that they might not think of, and that can be a nightmare situation if they're realizing all of that in the moment that here they are, the clock's ticking, they've got another day left, and just, you know, this is news to them. So I hate to say anything to people besides, yeah, man, we're gonna do it, and it's gonna be just amazing. It's gonna be a masterpiece, and it's gonna be done in 2 days. But
I loved, I kind of follow Fruition and Jay and the whole crowd, and I loved following the process that he shared about recording their most recent album with you, and how they saw it as a respite and a time of relaxation and creativity. And there was this, I just sensed a real broad sense of relaxation that they had in comparison to what it feels like to tour and be hitting it hard every single night. That was really neat to read about, you know, that they were going there to retreat as well.
Right,
you know?
right.
Well, okay, so let's get these questions rolling, and while people are thinking of your questions, you're welcome to use the microphone. We've got the lovely Mara.
All right, let's see, I see a question right there. Do you want to do Mike, or you want to?
Anna,
Can you use me like this?
They can't, behind
and
you.
John can take the microphone around too, if that's okay with David. While we're getting that kind of lined up, real quickly, you three be thinking of your favorite piece of gear. Be thinking about that. I'll give you some time to think, and then we'll wrap it up after Q&A with just a quick round of you telling us the best, most badass gear that you've got going on right now. Anna.
I was curious of the folks that are coming to you to pay like your rate as producers. What is the percentage of people that are independent artists that you're working with, as opposed to like people that are working with a record label, and then also like local folks compared to out of town folks?
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, that's a great question. I work with mostly independent artists who are mostly in town, I would say. And then I do work on the occasional project that is typically not like I'm not getting hired to produce. I'm usually just engineering on a label artist in town for, you know, a day or two, and they are, you know, playing a show, and they just are working on the record. So they come by my place and they'll cut vocals or whatever. They'll, you know, book the studio for a couple days when they're here, and I'll do the occasional thing like that too. But and then sometimes on those they will fly in like the producer who's on the project, you know, out of LA or wherever. But a lot of times on the most recent ones that I've done of those, there actually isn't I mean, there is a producer on the project, but they don't fly him in, and it's just, and I think that's maybe because of COVID stuff. I'm just sort of running the session, but majority of what I do is indie artists, local. Yeah.
Awesome. And Tucker, you have a different clientele, correct?
Yeah, I mean, most of my work is artists from out of town. That's not really by design, but that is the case, and most of them are indie artists. I mean, it's a funny time we're in to talk about indie artists, because you can, most of them, not all of the people I work with, but probably more than half are on a label, but in many cases it's a really small label. You know, like it's basically, it's just somebody that's going to help them release it, and the artist still might be having to come up with all or some of the money to make the record. So being on a label doesn't mean like
What it used to
the
mean.
pocketbooks are open and we're high rolling either. So yeah.
Yeah, primarily independent. Handful of artists on much smaller labels. One, I guess, on a sub of a major. Vastly people indie trying to make it and planning, and many of which plan on staying that way, attempting their own marketing. Yeah, and then almost primarily in town at this time. We've had a number of people that have come through on tour, stopped by, maybe booked a night. One larger artist, we're very close to the Moda, so one larger artist who was in town gone through, and it's mostly.
Damian Lillard?
I just love him so much. I have a nice band coming to your studio next week.
That's true. Very excited.
All right, so more questions. You
got a
can come up
question?
and, yeah.
So, thinking of what bands can do to prepare to come into the studio, with like an example of the situation I'm in, I've got a band that I'm working with. They didn't exactly rehearse or practice as they would perform. So we were in a situation where they absolutely wanted to use a click track, but then they are pushing and pulling all over that when they sounded a lot better just going free and natural. So what are your top wish lists of things you wish bands had prepared, ready, nailed down, that would save them and you the most time?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the click track thing, it's, at the end of the day, you know, the conversation I have with artists is like, if if it feels cool and, and it's gonna honestly like kill the performance for you to cut it to a click, then like, let's not cut it to a click. If we're gonna be overdubbing stuff and adding a lot of extra, like, especially like percussion and stuff that needs some sort of, guide, then yeah, maybe click track would be a good idea, but no hard fast rule for me there. And I would say, basic like rehearsal and, like at the end of the day, it is most studios are by the hour. So if you're coming in and you want to, I've had plenty of artists come in and basically treat the studio for a week of, we're recording, but they're basically rehearsing, and they got the money for that, so I don't care. But if you don't really have the money for that, then you might want to just do that at home. And there's a lot of pre-production stuff, honestly, nowadays that like, I'm really big on like, I'm happy to help you guys like do pre-production stuff at home with GarageBand or Logic or whatever. If it's gonna save us time in the studio, I'm just really big on like, the studio now, especially with indie artists who have tight budgets, the studio should really be a place where we are getting performances down. And yes, we're working on, making a killer record, but there was experimenting and that kind of stuff there. But with the bulk of the artists that I work with, I definitely have a conversation in the beginning where I'm like, let's do our like homework ahead of time, so then when we come in, and that's with like the writing arrangements and stuff and rehearsing and just like also talking about production and stuff. So then when we come in, we have a clearer idea of what we're going for, and then it's just a matter of like laying down performances. And sure, there's going to be an aspect of like filling stuff out, but especially if it's a band, then yeah, having like taking the time to rehearse and just like getting it feeling tight like you would be if you're like going to be going out on tour, is just going to prepare you so much better going into the studio. So
Yeah, I mean, agreed completely. I think most of it's common sense, just rehearse, and even if we're gonna maybe tinker with the arrangement in the studio, if you come in with one that then it's a lot easier to just be like, we're gonna take that section out, we're gonna add a section or something, like it's no big deal. But if you never really knew what you were gonna do to begin with, that conversation gets convoluted quickly. Another thing that I've experienced recently, somebody bringing in like 18 guitars, like really super cool guitars, but every one that we picked up and plugged in, it like had a buzz, or like the pots were dirty, and like in the middle of the take, like it was cutting in and out, or the intonation was bad. And I'm like, how about just one guitar that really works? So things like that, just checking your gear. If your drums have a bad rattle, well, they're gonna have a bad rattle tomorrow when you come to the studio and the microphones are on them. So either find different drums, or, I have drums, ask if, you're always welcome to my drums, but I like people to have the instrument that they feel really connected to start with. So things like that, make sure your instruments are maintained, that your acoustic guitar doesn't have a rattle in it. A lot of times people are like, oh yeah, God, yeah, it's always bugged me, and it just didn't occur to them. They thought it will magically disappear the day they go to the studio.
Do you have a plug-in for that?
yeah,
I'm sure there is.
exactly.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So Frankie, I met you last month, and I've been in your studio before a while ago with Kevin Sept. So I know both of y'all are pretty big on building community through like your YouTube. You have musicians come in and play in your studio, which is dope. It's a beautiful studio. And you were telling me that you have ciphers. So like, how has that been for you as far as like networking, kind of building up the brand and different things like that, just kind of getting more people involved in what you do as an engineer, kind of adding a little spice. Like, how's that been, and how do you feel about that moving forward, post-pandemic, quote unquote?
Thank you.
Do you want to take it?
Frankie?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm always, any event that's not like me one-on-one with a band in the studio from the start, I'm kind of like, I don't know. And then, A Revolution, she's the one who does the ciphers. So we gave it we did it once, and it continues to be one of, aside from community building, an incredible business decision.
What's a cipher?
Cipher, in this case, it's mostly just freestyling. So we get a couple, 2 or 3, sometimes one DJ, and just set up a couple mics, and I actually contract my videographer friend Chris to do the ciphers. And he does the whole live stream. We go to Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. I'm mostly just preparing that, mixing that down for the stream, and managing the audio. And I mean, it just continues to give and give, and that's anything involving again a broader discussion of like what it means to like open a new studio in the 21st century, which is in some ways a crazy thing to do, and and so a lot of that for me evolves in this discussion of alternative bookings and what are the kind of things that you can do, and what are the ways that a studio can be used to generate income in addition, and also build community. And of course, that's a classic example. And they've been amazing because A Revolution, Alex, is just a community leader. I mean, she's just fantastic. And, you know, I have gotten so many people who have come through there, obviously. I mean, it's like showing it off, obviously. And people come in and see it, and then they want to step into the control room, and we can talk. And I've made a lot of clients by doing that. But more generally speaking, you know, building the studio, I took things in mind like video content in mind. I took things in mind like podcasts, film podcasts in mind, potential event booking and sort of these things. So, does that answer your question? Yeah, cool, thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, we do the writing sessions at the studio, and I had started that pretty early on with the studio, and the original goal was to just you know, offer high quality videos to artists to kind of showcase, you know, the local talent in Portland, and, you know, hopefully for it to expand to something where I do have like artists from out of state coming in, and, you know, if they're on tour or whatever, which is, you know, we have definitely had some artists do that. And it's honestly, I mean, that was the main goal. I knew that there would be some, you know, positive marketing that we'd be getting out of it, and there was definitely like an aspect of like, you know, we're hoping that this will help just get the name out there, you know, with the studio, which it 100% did. I mean, it was the best marketing tool that we could have done for the studio. The videos, of course, you know, for me, I was really big, like, I remember over breakfast one day with my videographer who started the rhyme sessions with me, he's now in LA, but we still do sessions together, and I've got a guy in Portland who does the bulk of them now. But that initial meeting that I had with the guy who started the sessions with me, I said, you know, here's the deal, like, I want to do this, I want to make it affordable so that artists, it's kind of a no-brainer for artists to do it, but we still need to keep the quality crazy high. Like, I don't want to, even if it means we're basically making no money, I don't really want to, you know, sacrifice the quality. And he was like, yeah, cool, let's do it. And I think that that's the biggest reason why they've been so successful, because you know, the video and the audio is rock solid, and that's been a big part of it.
I don't want to be a ball hog, but I got the mic. So, we heard horror stories. I always, like, me and the engineer that I work with, we have a really good time in the studio because I'm pretty fucking dope at what I do, right? So how do y'all feel when it's like home run, you know you like this one, you almost mix the song on the first try, like it's hot, it's dope, like when it meets the quality standard that you want, like what's that feeling like, and can you kind of take us through that process? Because engineers don't talk like that. So, you know, I got you here. We might as well figure out, like, what's it
Engineers
like?
don't have a mic to drop.
Okay. I'm not dropping mine.
It's like an on a mic and yours. Yeah, I mean, I from a interacting with clients perspective, I always say, like, the favorite thing about my job is I see, like, the best sides of people, and when I provide them with a job well done that they're hearing back and enjoying of something that means like that much to them, that's a pretty good feeling. And yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the most important thing in the world to that person in a lot of ways, like, you know, and
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So, like, in the last few years, like the influx of people recording their stuff at home and then bringing it to you to, in the worst case, polish a turd, in the best case, to kind of help them get it to the professional level that they want. Do you have any sort of advice as far as, like, someone who has actually done some research and is getting pretty good results with their home studio? Like, what is it that someone in this kind of scenario can do? You know, I've learned my frequency range. I know where to notch out do a sweep and notch out my, feedback and, do my high and my low pass. And, I feel like I have a pretty solid process for my foundation tracks, but I can't quite get it to where you all do, where it's like, the nice final thing. So what is something like I can do on my end to bring it to you to make it that final thing, even though I'm tracking it myself, and then what?
Are you asking what you can do if you're bringing it to somebody else to help finish it, or
to bring it to you to finish it, to be like, now this can go on vinyl, now this can be a final piece, which I myself can maybe get 80%, but then I can't get it 100%, which is where you come in.
Like how to prepare it to bring it to or mixing.
Yes.
Honestly, I would say like a big, like, I remember a few years ago, this, like, I just think about this all the time. I did a jazz record for this great jazz bass player, and I was surprised he'd asked me to do his record, because I was just like, I mean, you could do your record with like anybody, and felt very honored. And I cut the record at a great studio. This is prior to me having my studio, and mixed it back at my place, or my place at the time. And then at the end of the record, he was like, "Dude, this is like the best record." I'm so stoked, and I was like, "Great." Honestly, I just it was great players, great studio. The goal for me was just not to screw it up. And honestly, when I'm giving advice to artists who are doing stuff at home, I'm just like, as long as you got like a decent chain, and I mean, honestly, a decent chain nowadays is like an SM7 into like a little Apollo is like fine. And if you've got a nice pre and some other stuff, great. But as long as you're just not delivering me like clipped, distorted audio tracks, and it's just like everything's just like fine, then that's plenty for me to mix off of, and at that point, that's why people are coming to me, because they maybe have cut some stuff, it sounds okay, and then they get into the mixing, and there's a lot that we can do, mixing wise, and the experience really is king there. Sure, gear is great too, but as I get further in my career, experience really is king, and that's really where people come to me and they bring me tracks and that they sound decent, and then I make them sound a lot better. But I mean, there is the aspect of like, I could totally tell you to like, go out and buy X piece of gear and spend like, $10,000 on like a really solid chain.
Yeah, it ain't gonna happen.
And that'll help, but honestly, like, the reality is I don't typically tell people that, because A, it's not gonna happen, and B, that gear in the right hands, like us, it'll be well used, but in the wrong hands, like if you don't really have the training or the experience, it's not necessarily gonna make that much of a difference, so. That's at least been my experience.
Yeah, and are we tracking your question correctly? You're not asking about like a technical way to like prepare your things or something, right?
All I mean is like, I'm pretty confident with the tracks I've recorded at home, and I can mix, and I can't quite master, but I can at least volume adjust to make sure everything's at the sort of same level. But I just mean like, what can I do on my end to, when I do bring it to you, to finalize it as a professional, finalized deal? Like, what can I do on my end to cut studio time? Because look, I don't have money. So how can I expedite the process when I hand this off to you, and while we're working together on it,
I think
finish it?
The best thing you could do is to be stoked about what you've done, and maybe to be able to articulate to some extent what you're not able to finish yourself, you know? Just whatever it is. If you're just like, man, I just don't like, I feel like my reverbs aren't as cool as these records that I listen to, or like whatever it is, then that person can really help you do it, you know? But if you're already stoked about the music, like intuitively, somebody with a lot of experience will probably already know how to just hear what you've got and just be like, oh yeah, that. But look, now it has more depth of field. It's like, it's you know.
So like sort of knowing what you need and being able to tell
Yeah, I mean, ideally, but I also understand sometimes people come and they're just like, I don't really know, like, I liked it about 2 months ago and now I'm not sure, like, can you help me? And then that's when my like inner music fan kicks in and is like, dude, that right there is badass, you're overthinking it, like, you know, and you sort of help talk them down, unless you don't think it's very good, and then maybe you try to explain to them what they should go back and work on.
Mara, do you have a question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I have. I have just a couple of comments. How many people here are engineers or producers or studio owners themselves? Yeah, I mean, that's great. We had hoped to have it out for tonight, but soon we will be opening up the self-entry for the studio production part of our industry directory. And the goal of that is to get the word out to people outside our community, so it's not just all competing for local stuff, and whether that's for mixing or for tracking or any of it. So definitely make sure that everybody gets involved in that industry directory, because then we want to do a lot of promotion of Portland as a music production destination. The other thing is that I had a great conversation with Matt, I don't know, years ago, it's always years ago now, that was talking about the fact that Portland is definitely more collaborative than competitive, and it's one of the glories of our music economy. And that when you do a production listing for your studio or your work as a studio producer or an engineer, think about what you're really great at. Think about the genres that you really like and you have great experience and a great book, I guess you don't call it book, a great portfolio of samples and variety. Don't go in saying, I can do everything, because everybody can't do everything. And I think if we all lean into what we do really well, and that might be, you've got solid equipment and you're great for demos, and that's what you really want to focus on, and then you'll be building up your skills and moving up. So just, I think some self-evaluation and some candor in the listings will go much further than everybody saying we can do everything. You can pick Tucker or you can pick me. You know, it doesn't serve anybody. So we're hoping that does it. I also wanted to quickly say that Music Portland, that fights all the time on your behalf, burns about $4,000 a month in technology, in services, in payroll, in contractors, and all this other stuff. So far in September, we have gotten $775 of membership dues. If you are not a member and you're an artist, take a minute, become a member. It's 25 bucks. If you are a professional and you want an enhanced listing in this directory, become a business member. It's either $250 for the whole year or $22 a month. But we really need you guys to step up, particularly as Music Oregon is building. It's going to have its own funding stream, but the C6 can't get money. It has to be member represented and member supported. So musicportland.org/join. So those are my two things. We're really excited. We're doing a series of presentations with Amped Up. This is Holly. If you guys don't know about Amped Up, grill her. But we're doing things that are not a commercial for that, and they're not, a commercial for Music Portland. They're just some really great, interesting sessions. And so Holly's going to talk about the first one.
Go ahead.
Oh, well.
I can talk about
You
it.
go ahead.
We have two people that have questions. Should they wait? Or,
I had a question. That was
That's what you have?
That's my God.
I don't have a question.
You talk about it.
Okay, so how to take the mystery out of touring. is the first one, and it's going to be at Kells on the 19th of September. So we'll be sending out a notice about it, but these are really really amazing sessions.
Northwest.
So the next one after that is how to make more money. Let's have a hand count. Who wants to make more money? Some of you are very selfless. And then another one, then one is the political one I talked about on October 17th at the Artichoke. And the last one is...
What happens when your sound guy doesn't show up?
Oh yeah, what happens when your sound guy doesn't show up? So they're going to be awesome. They're going to be super fun. Please come out for them. I bogeyed it, apparently. We have a couple more questions. Hit it.
All right, David, and so we've got four more questions. Brad, are you? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So many questions. Okay. I'll make mine quick, and maybe you guys can just like rock, paper, scissors for the best answer. So I'm Holly with Amped Up. We look forward to seeing all of you Monday night, the 19th at Kells Northwest. And my question is, we talked about sound studio preparation, practice, what happens inside those four walls with all that amazing gear. I was curious because in all of the musicians that we represent and that are on our platform, going into the studio is a really sacred event where that is a platform for them to launch their career. And it may happen 3 or 4 times by the time they're 35 or 40. So it's not something they're doing every year. What is the best idea or the most consistent, solid idea that you have seen that musicians can use to take that album and move their career forward afterwards? Because if no one buys it and no one sees it and it sits in the dark, then it does them no good. So how would you suggest that they market it? What's the best idea you've seen?
Who wants to answer it? One person. No?
Not me.
Okay.
Album that. I would say, I just tell everyone, like, unfortunately, that's not what I do. So there's some great, I know I've got some great PR connections, and I usually just send people that way. And, I think that there's a lot of people in the industry who are, doing a lot of great stuff on that side. It is tough. I do, of course, warn every person that, like, hey, I may send you to like 3 different PR companies, but all 3 of them you might actually end up using, and you might spend a boatload of money with all 3, and you might not get anything out of it because PR is a weird world. And so just be aware. But that's usually where I send people to the professionals to do that.
All right, David.
So I have a comment for the gentleman who asked, what can I do if I'm bringing my tracks I've worked on at home to a professional in the studio to continue the work? What can I do to save time in the studio to make the situation more efficient? And they gave some really great answers. I just have one more thing to add, which is be very, very organized. Make sure your tracks are labeled clearly. Make sure all the tracks for one song maybe are in a folder together. So when you get to the studio, the person you've hired doesn't have to spend time trying to figure out, well, what is what? You can look at the track name and know, oh, that's a kick drum, and that's the vocal. And if you have several guitar solo takes, if you can, figure out which one you want to use and just don't even bring the other ones. Or if you do bring the other ones, have notes. This is one we think we want to use, but also can you listen to this one and see what you think about it. But just don't waste their time doing things you could have done at home to make things move more efficiently. That's my comment.
Who are you and what's your business?
My name is David Strite. I am also a producer and recording engineer.
He also does the sound for each of these meetings. So give him a thank you, David.
He's the sound guy that does show up.
Here we go. Last question.
Okay, I have a question about production and staying on the right track versus getting in your head during production. So self-producing can be such a tricky animal to wrangle, and there's times where if you're lucky, most of the songs on the album just kind of dial into where they land in a place you're really happy with, and then there are those like wily tunes that surprisingly don't work, but you want to include them on the record. Maybe you shouldn't, but what are some tricks of the trades that you guys do to stay not in your head, to find the right place? Is it, go small, strip it all the way back, start all over? I'm just curious to hear about it.
It's a great question.
That's a great question.
I mean, I can answer, but
yeah, I've got a couple thoughts. I do like to, if we're talking about a record, I mean, I work on, I definitely work on records, albums and EPs and stuff, but I also work on a lot of singles, which is always easier, of course, because now we're just like, we're not really looking at body work. But if we are looking at a body work, I try to, again, sort of start with like the pre-production stage and look at all the songs, and I kind of start to get an idea and like talk references and sounds and stuff, and so I start to kind of get an idea in my head of like where I want potentially each song to go, and I think that there's definitely an aspect of like I may have a path that I want to go down, but I'm still very open to like trying out other paths and stuff. But I have tried to get a lot better, clearer with, if I'm going down a certain path and I want that production to like that, it to end up sounding a certain way, I just really try to just like, unless it's really not the right direction, I just really try to stick with it, and I really try to like let it come to fruition, because in my experience, if I'm going down too many paths, it does tend to then confuse things. And I was just having a conversation with an artist the other day about this, where it's like, early on in my career, I felt like I made so many songs that were just like a complete identity crisis, because I had like, some really cool idea to go with it, and then in the middle of it, I'm like, oh no, but like let's go this direction, and then at the end, I'm like with the mix, I'm like, oh no, but let's actually do this different, I don't know, vibe. And then I listen to at the end of the day, I'm like, man, this song is like all over the place. If I would have just went with that one from the beginning and just saw that through, then, it would be what it is. And I feel like at some point you do realize that this is definitely not the right direction, and then you can kind of pivot. But I really do try to just like find something and stick with it, and then of course look at the body of the album as a whole, and try to make sure that that's cohesive, So.
Stephanie Schneiderman, great artist. Yes. A few things that come to mind in addition to what Matt said are just not getting too precious, right? So like if you're, the first few songs went great and you're getting stuck on this, what's going on? Let's just put it aside, let's move on to the next song, come back. Half the time when you come back the next day or later that day or the next week, whatever it is, it just makes more sense. But if not, it's telling you something, and then you just, I start scanning, I'm like, let's look at the tempo, sometimes you're like, oh, wait a second. Yeah, we're forcing this. This isn't a slow song, or this isn't a fast song. Try that. Always keep it on the table to cut the song too, because that can happen where you're just like, no, but I remember when I wrote it and I just loved it so much, and so I was like, oh my God, it's gonna be my new song on my new record. And yes, you need a lot of that to fight for your artistic babies and see them through, but also sometimes they're just telling you they're not ready. So like, leave that option on the table. Obviously, if it's happening to half the songs on your record, can't really do that. But often there's like one or maybe two that are gonna put up more of a fight and see how bad you want it. And I think often it's that, or it's like, oh, you thought it was the stripped down one? Well, try it with the band. You thought it was this big, huge production? Try it stripped down. Not being too precious, I think, is huge, and I have to check myself a lot on that too. 'Cause, I mean, we're all just, you know, we all get preconceived notions of like, oh yeah, this one's gonna be like that. It's gonna be that tune on the record. And sometimes it's not. Once everyone's in the room and it's all happening, but also by that point in the record making process, that might not be what even the record needs, you know? It's just what you thought it might need 2 months ago when you heard the demos.
Does that help? Totally. You know what I was thinking is like being able to communicate with a producer is sort of like getting a good haircut. I recently asked for curtain bangs, you know, of someone who didn't know what curtain bangs were. It reminds me, you might not know what curtain bangs are either. I'm not trying to get all gender specific, but yeah, I mean, this has been so fascinating to me. I could do this for another hour, but Mara?
Yeah, since we are, I think, 30 minutes over time, we want to give you guys time to mingle. Most of these guys are sticking around. I think you're running off to it almost immediately to a thing. He's very in demand.
No, I'm going to see Kim Gordon.
But, so I'm sure that they'd be happy to talk to anybody if you have questions that we didn't address. But thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, give them a big hand.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the gear.
Can you do a quick round and just tell your favorite piece of gear? Because I know you've been thinking about it. Okay, real quick. Lightning round. Frankie?
I, for some reason, own a Mode 1. Probably 50s, 50s. It's on the chopping block, but...
And I'm going to be just subversive, and I'm going to say The Room.
That was good. That was very creepy.
As the guy who spent a lot of money on his room.
I think it's always like flavor of the day for me, and currently it's been my Highland Dynamics BG2. I love that compressor. So.
Nice. This is awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been great. Thank you. Awesome. That was great.